My grandson called me a burden at Thanksgiving dinner in front of 11 people, and everybody at that table laughed except one person. His girlfriend did not laugh. She waited about 40 minutes, and then she found me alone in the kitchen drying a roasting pan, and she smiled at me and asked what pills I take. I gave her the honest answer. That was the last honest answer I gave anybody for 6 weeks. If you have ever been treated like an expense by the family you spent your life providing for, hit the like button and tell me where you are listening from in the comments below. Because what that young woman did with my answer nearly killed me, and I want every person hearing this to understand exactly how close it came. My name is Harlan Bissonnette. I am 70 years old. For 42 years I was an independent pharmacist in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I started behind a counter on Phillips Avenue in 1979 with a mortar, a pill tray, and $11,000 I borrowed from my father-in-law, and by 2009 I owned 11 stores across 3 counties. My wife Delphine ran the front of the original store for 31 years and died of a stroke in her own kitchen on a Sunday morning in 2016. Our son Emmett died 4 years before that. I have one living relative on this earth, and his name is Tobias, and I raised him from the age of 9. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor above the original store, in the same rooms Delphine and I lived in before we could afford a house. I drive a 2004 Chevrolet with a rusted rocker panel. Everyone in Sioux Falls believes I lost the chain in the recession and walked away with nothing, and I have never once corrected a single person. That was a deliberate choice, and it is the only reason I am alive today. Here is what actually happened. In 2011, a regional group came at me for the 11 stores. The negotiation took 9 months, and I let the local newspaper write it up as a distressed sale, because a man who is thought to be broke is left alone, and a man who is thought to be rich is never left alone again. The final number, after taxes and after the note I carried, was $26 million. It has sat in a trust since the year Delphine died. I have never touched a dollar of it. I live on Social Security and a private annuity that pays me $2,900 a month, and I have let my own grandson believe for 14 years that I am a retired man in a rented apartment who could not afford to fix his car. I also kept the building. The original store on Phillips Avenue is still mine. The pharmacy operating in it today pays rent to a holding company in Delaware every 1st of the month, and the young man who runs that pharmacy has never once asked who owns the company. I want to say something about Tobias before I tell you the rest, because I owe him that much and because you need to understand what he was to me. When Emmett died, Tobias was 9 years old, and his mother was gone, and he came to live in these rooms above the store. I raised that boy. I taught him to read a label. I let him sit on an upturned crate behind the counter after school and count out 90 tablets into a tray, and I checked every single count myself, and when he got it right, I gave him a quarter. He knew the alphabet of the shelves before he knew his multiplication tables. He is 31 years old now. He works in medical device sales out of Omaha, and there was a stretch of about 11 years where I thought he was going to be a considerably better man than I ever was. He brought Camille home for the first time at Easter of this year. She was 34, poised, and very easy to talk to. She said she worked in pharmaceutical logistics, which is a phrase that covers a great deal of ground. She asked me thoughtful questions about the old store. She remembered the name of Delphine's dog, which had come up once, in passing, for 11 seconds. I noticed that at the time, and I want to be honest with you. What I felt was pleased. An old man notices when a young person bothers to remember something. Thanksgiving was at Tobias's house in Omaha. 11 people around the table, most of them Camille's people. I drove down in the Chevrolet, 4 hours each way, and I brought Delphine's cranberry relish in a Tupperware because I make it every year, and there is no reason to stop making it. The remark came out somewhere around the 2nd glass of wine. Somebody asked Tobias whether he was going to move to a bigger place. He said not yet, and then he tipped his head toward me at the far end of the table and said, "Not until I know what I am doing about him." There was a small pause, the kind where people are not certain yet whether something is a joke. "Grandpa is in a walk-up with no elevator," Tobias said, and he was grinning, and he was talking to the table and not to me. 70 years old, no savings, no long-term care, no plan. He is a burden waiting to happen, and everybody in this room knows it. I love him, but he is going to be my problem, and I am going to be paying for it. And I would just like one Thanksgiving where somebody acknowledges that." The table laughed. Not cruelly. That is the part I want you to hear. They laughed the easy, comfortable way that people laugh when a host has given them permission, and one of Camille's cousins raised a glass to me, and somebody said something about the sacrifices of the sandwich generation, and the conversation moved on inside of 9 seconds. 9 seconds. I have thought about those 9 seconds more than almost anything else in this story. I sat at the end of that table and I did not say a word, and what I felt was not anger. Anger came later. What I felt was the specific quiet that comes over you when you check a count and it is wrong. I have counted out something in the neighborhood of 4 million tablets in my life, and there is a moment when your hand knows the number is wrong before your eyes have finished the row. That is what I felt. A wrongness in the hand. Because here is the thing about what my grandson said. It was not the word burden. Boys say stupid things at their own tables with wine in them, and I have said worse in my life. It was that he had a plan. You do not say the words, "I do not know what I am doing about him," unless you have already been thinking about it, in private, for some time, with somebody. I got up after the pie and I went into the kitchen and I started drying the roasting pan, because I needed my hands to be doing something. That is where Camille found me. She came in with 2 wine glasses and set them by the sink, and leaned against the counter with her arms folded, comfortable, like we were old friends taking a breather. "He should not have said that," she said. "He is not wrong to worry. He is wrong to say it at a table." She smiled. She had a very good smile. "Harlan, can I ask you something practical? He worries about you constantly and he never asks the actual questions, and I think somebody should. Go ahead. Your health. Really?" She tipped her head. "How is your heart?" "It has been repaired, and it works." "What does that mean?" "It means I had 2 stents put in 9 years ago and I take a tablet every morning and I have not had a symptom since. I set the pan in the rack. I see a cardiologist twice a year and he has never once looked worried." "What do you take?" And I told her. I stood in my grandson's kitchen with a dish towel in my hand, and I told this young woman the exact medication I take every morning of my life, and the strength, and the fact that I have taken it without interruption for 9 years, and that I fill it at the store on Phillips Avenue because I have filled everything there since 1979, and I am not about to start driving to a chain. She listened. She did not take out a phone. She did not write anything down. She nodded twice and said that it was good that I was on top of it, and that most men our age are not, and she picked up her wine glass and went back out to the table. 42 years behind a counter, and I did not hear a single thing wrong in that conversation. That is what I have to live with. I drove home the next morning. 2 weeks went by. Nothing happened. And then in the second week of December, 3 things happened in 9 days, and I did not connect them to each other until it was very nearly too late. The first was that Tobias started calling me. Twice a week, which he had not done in 4 years. Warm calls. "How are you sleeping? Are you eating? Did you take your pill this morning, Grandpa?" That last question came up in every single call, and I thought it was sweet. I thought the boy had hurt himself at Thanksgiving and had been ashamed of it. The second was that my prescription came in a different bottle. Not different in any way a normal person would notice. Same pharmacy label, same white cap, same amber plastic. But the tablets inside had a slightly different sheen to them, and when I poured out a week into my hand on the following Sunday the way I have done every Sunday since Delphine died, they sat in my palm about 2 grams light. I want to explain what that means, because it is the entire reason I am still breathing. A pharmacist who has counted by hand for 42 years does not weigh things. He does not need to. Your hand becomes a scale, and it becomes a very good one, because you spent 9 hours a day for 4 decades pouring quantities into a tray and sweeping them into a bottle. You know what 30 tablets feels like. You know what 90 feels like. And more than that, you know how a tablet behaves. You know the sound it makes falling onto a plastic tray. You know that a compressed tablet with an active ingredient in it has a certain density and a certain dull surface, and that a tablet pressed out of filler and nothing else is lighter and brighter, and it rings a little when it lands. I stood in my kitchen at 7 in the morning with 7 tablets in my palm, and I knew. I did not know what they were. I knew what they were not. The third thing happened on the following Thursday. I came up the stairs from the store with the mail, and in it was a heavy envelope from a law office in Omaha, and inside that envelope was a petition for the appointment of a guardian of the person and estate of Harlan Bissonnette, filed in the Circuit Court of Minnehaha County, with a hearing date of Tuesday, January the 6th, at 9 in the morning. The petitioner was my grandson. Attached to it, as Exhibit A, was a letter on physician's letterhead from a doctor in Omaha I had never met, stating that he had conducted an in-person cognitive evaluation of me and had found significant impairment consistent with a progressive neurodegenerative process, and recommending that I not be permitted to manage my own medical or financial affairs. I sat down on the top step of my own staircase and read it twice. Then I looked at the date of the evaluation. The letter stated that the examination was performed on the afternoon of November the 18th. On the 18th of November, I was in Rapid City. I have proctored the State Board's continuing education examination for 11 years, running, and I had been in a hotel conference room 350 miles away from Omaha from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, with a sign-in sheet, a hotel folio, and 41 licensed pharmacists in the room who could all put their hand on a Bible and say so. Nobody examined me on the 18th of November. Nobody has examined me in Omaha in my life. And then I looked at the bottom of that letter, at the physician's national provider number printed under the signature, and I stopped breathing. I know provider numbers. I have spent 4 decades looking at them on prescriptions. I know the shape of them, the way you know a phone number that used to be your own. And I sat on that staircase and looked at that number for a long time before I understood why it was bothering me. The number was not a physician's. The first 2 digits were wrong. That is a dispenser number. That number belonged to a pharmacy. I did not go back upstairs. I sat on that staircase in the cold with the envelope on my knees until the light in the stairwell went off on its timer, and then I sat there in the dark for a while longer. A guardianship petition is not a lawsuit. People do not understand this, and they should. It is a proceeding in which a court is asked to take a living adult and remove his legal personhood and hand it to somebody else, and if it is granted, that man cannot open a bank account, cannot hire a lawyer, cannot refuse a medication, and cannot move himself out of a facility somebody else selects. He is, in the eyes of the law, no longer a person who decides. He becomes an estate with a body attached. I have seen it done properly, to people who genuinely needed it. I have also seen it done the other way twice in my career, both times from behind my counter, watching an adult child walk in with a court order and take control of a parent's medications, and there is not one thing a pharmacist is permitted to do about it, except fill what he is told to fill. There were 23 days between that staircase and the 6th of January. I made 3 decisions that night, and I made them in the order that a man makes decisions when he has spent his life in a profession where an error kills somebody. The first was that I would not stop taking the tablets. That was the hardest one, and I want to explain it, because it sounds insane. I had a bottle of what I was fairly certain were inert tablets, and my instinct, and probably yours, was to throw them out and drive to a different pharmacy and get the real thing. But if I did that, the bottle was gone. The physical evidence of the crime would be in a landfill in Minnehaha County, and what I would have left is a 70-year-old man saying that his pills felt wrong in his hand, standing in front of a judge who has already been handed a letter saying that man has dementia. So I kept taking them, out of that same bottle, every morning where the store's overhead camera could see me through the front window if it came to that. And I put the tablets themselves into a different container, and I understood exactly what that meant. It meant I was going to spend the next 3 weeks with nothing in my system, and I have taken that medication without a single missed day for 9 years, and I know precisely what the literature says about interrupting it abruptly in a man with 2 stents. The second decision was that I would not call the police. If I had walked into a station in December with an amber bottle and a story about my own grandson, I would have been a 70-year-old man with a court file already open saying he has a progressive neurodegenerative process. They would have been kind to me. That is what makes it unbearable. They would have been very kind to me, and they would have called Tobias. The third decision took me until almost 4 in the morning, and it was the one that actually mattered. I picked up the phone and called Odette Kowalczyk. Odette is 68 years old, and she spent 26 years as an inspector for the State Board of Pharmacy. In 2014, she opened an investigation into a central fill facility that was shipping short counts across 4 states, and the company had a lobbyist and 2 legislators, and 11 months later, Odette was pushed into an early retirement with a letter in her file that had no business being there. 11 pharmacists in this state were subpoenaed in that matter. 10 of them found reasons not to be helpful. I sat in a hearing room in Pierre for 2 days and told the truth about what had come into my stores and what the invoices said, and it cost me a wholesaler contract and it was worth every penny. I had not asked her for a single thing in 11 years. She picked up on the 4th ring, at 4 in the morning, and said my name before I said hers. We met at 7 at a diner on Minnesota Avenue. She came in a parka with her hair still flat on one side and a legal pad, and I put the bottle and the court file down on the table between the syrup and the napkins. She read the physician's letter first. Then she picked up the bottle, held it to the window, rolled it slowly a quarter turn, and set it down. "How long?" she said. "6 weeks that I know of." The sheen changed at the December fill. It could have started in November. "And you have been taking them out of that bottle every morning, where the camera can see me." Odette put both hands flat on the table. "Harlan, I want to say this once and then I will help you," she said. "You are 3 weeks off a cardiac medication and you are sitting in a diner telling me about chain of custody. If you drop dead in this booth, your evidence is beautiful and you are still dead. If I go get a clean fill somewhere else today, they will know within a week that I know," I said. "The database talks. Camille works in what she calls logistics. Odette, they have already filed. They have a hearing date. If they find out I am on to them before the 6th of January, all they have to do is nothing, and the court appoints my grandson, and after that a man who signs my consent forms can put anything he likes in front of me, and I have no standing to refuse it." She sat back. "So the safest place for you is dead center inside their plan." "For 23 days, I said. "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she picked up her pen. "And I have known her a long time, and I know what that means." "Then we do it fast," she said. "Tell me about the number." I turned the physician's letter around and put my thumb under the provider number. "That is not a physician's identifier," I said. "The prefix is a dispenser prefix. Whoever built that letterhead pulled a live number out of a system and put it under a doctor's name, and they picked one they thought nobody would ever run. Do you know whose it is?" "I have an idea," I said. "That is what is keeping me up." She ran it that afternoon. She still has friends in Pierre, and it took her about 90 minutes. The number belonged to the pharmacy on Phillips Avenue. My store, the one operating out of my building, 16 feet below the bed I sleep in. The pharmacist in charge of record was Wendell Marchetti. I have to tell you about Wendell, and I would rather not. He came to me as an intern in 2014 out of the college in Brookings, 23 years old, $131,000 in student debt, and no family in this state at all. He was slow at first, and I nearly cut him loose in the 3rd month. Then I watched him catch an interaction on a chart that 2 prescribers had walked straight past, and after that I never worried about him again. I trained that young man for 4 years. When the group sold the Phillips Avenue store's operating rights in 2019, and he wanted to buy in, the bank would not touch him with that debt load, and I signed the personal guarantee on his note myself, $240,000. He does not know to this day that the co-signer and the landlord are the same man, because it was papered through the trust. I have eaten dinner in that young man's home. I have held his daughter, and his dispenser number was sitting on a forged medical document, being used to have me declared incompetent. Odette called me at 9 that night and told me what the state's prescription monitoring data showed, and it was the moment the whole shape of it turned over. My prescription had been transferred. Not filled, transferred. On the 12th of November, 6 days before the fake examination, my maintenance prescription had been electronically transferred out of the Phillips Avenue Pharmacy to a central fill facility in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and had been shipped back to Phillips Avenue in sealed vials for local dispensing. That is a completely ordinary arrangement. Thousands of independent stores do it. It is how a small pharmacy competes on cost. The transfer had been authorized under Wendell's credentials, and the account manager of record on the Council Bluffs facility, the person whose signature was on the participation agreement with the Phillips Avenue store, was C. Beaumont Ansel. Camille. I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a while. because now the arithmetic ran backward, and when arithmetic runs backward, it means you have had the story upside down from the beginning. Camille did not meet my grandson and then learn about me. She was in the medication supply chain for the store that fills my prescriptions before she ever laid eyes on Tobias. Odette pulled the rest of it over the next 4 days. It took a forensic accountant and 2 records requests, and every piece of it made me colder. Camille Beaumont-Ancel joined that central fill company in March of 2023. In August of 2023, she ran what the industry politely calls a book review of the independent accounts in her territory. That review pulls patient-level data, age, chronic conditions, refill adherence, payer type. It is a marketing tool. It is supposed to tell you which stores are worth keeping. She had run it. And in a territory of 411 independent pharmacies, she had gone down to the level of individual patients, and she had spent an unusual amount of time in the Phillips Avenue file, and 11 weeks later, she was at a wine bar in Omaha standing next to a medical device salesman named Tobias Bissonnette, who had the same last name as a 70-year-old cardiac patient with 9 years of perfect refill adherence and no dependence. She did not find my grandson and then find me. She found me first. She went and got him. And Tobias, who I raised, who sat on a crate behind my counter and counted tablets for a quarter, had been selected as a component. I want to be careful here, because when I first understood that, I felt something dangerous, and it was pity. For about a day and a half, I let myself think that my grandson was a stupid, vain young man who had been picked out and worked, and that if I could pull him loose from her, the boy might still be in there somewhere. Then Odette got the phone records, and I stopped thinking that permanently. Tobias called that law office in Omaha on the 8th of November, 4 days before the prescription was transferred, 11 days before the fraudulent examination, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. He hired the lawyer first, before Camille asked me a single question in that kitchen, which meant that when he tipped his head down the table at me in front of 11 people and said that he did not know what he was doing about me, the petition was already being drafted. And when his girlfriend came and found me at the sink and asked me what I take, she was not fishing. She already had the transferred prescription. She was confirming, out of my own mouth, that I did not know it had moved. The 2 of them had run a test on me at the Thanksgiving table, in front of company, and I had passed it, and they had gone home and proceeded. I went down into the store the next morning and bought a candy bar I did not want, and I stood at the counter and made conversation with Wendell Marchetti for 4 minutes about his daughter's ear infection, while a young technician filled a basket behind him, and he was easy and warm, and he called me Mr. B the way he has since he was 23, and I smiled at him and paid with a 5 and went back up the stairs and sat down and put my hands over my face. That was the 22nd of December, 15 days. Here is where I have to tell you about the physical part, because it is the part I left out of the version I told the police, and I am not going to leave it out of the version I tell you. By Christmas Eve, I was in trouble. 3 weeks without that medication in a man with my history is not a theoretical exercise, and my body had begun to keep score. My resting pulse, which has run in the 50s since I quit smoking in 1988, was over 100 sitting still. I woke on the 23rd at 4 in the morning with my heart going in a way I have felt exactly twice before in my life, and I sat on the edge of the bed for 11 minutes with my hand flat on my chest counting it, because there was nothing else in the apartment to do. I could not get up the last 4 stairs on the 24th without stopping. I put a chair on the landing so that there would be somewhere to stop that looked like furniture instead of a symptom. My cardiologist's follow-up appointment was on the 21st of November. Camille had called and canceled it on the 17th, on my behalf, as my grandson's authorized contact, and had rescheduled it to the 9th of February. 2 weeks after they would have had me. That was when I understood the whole design, and it is the coldest piece of engineering I have ever encountered in my life. They were not going to kill me. Not in any way a person is normally killed. Nobody was going to put anything into me. They were going to take something out and simply wait, and let a 70-year-old man's own repaired heart do the work on a schedule, and there would be no toxicology, and no wound, and no autopsy, because a 70-year-old cardiac patient with 2 stents and a court file describing his cognitive decline who is found on his kitchen floor is not a homicide. He is a Tuesday, and the guardianship petition was never actually about the money. It was the paperwork that made the death unremarkable. It was there so that when it happened, there would already be a court record, filed by a devoted grandson, establishing that the old man had been failing for months. They were not hiding the murder. They were filing it in advance. Odette drove down on Christmas night and looked at me for about 4 seconds in my own doorway and said we were done playing. I told her we were 11 days out, and that I was not going to hand a federal prosecutor a case built on a bottle and a feeling. Then get me the fill log, she said. The physical one, not the electronic record, because the electronic record is exactly what she controls. Every pharmacy in this country runs a physical inventory count once a year. Independents do it overnight, between close and open, because you cannot count a store that is serving customers. You hire temporary counters, 4 or 5 of them, and they work from midnight until 6 in the morning with a clipboard and a tray, and the pharmacist in charge stays for the controlled substances and then usually goes home and leaves a technician to run out the shelf stock. The Phillips Avenue store does its count on the second Monday after New Year's. It has done it on that day for 41 years, because I set the date in 1984. That year they moved it up. They ran it on the 29th of December, 4 days before the hearing week, and Odette found the temporary staffing order in the vendor portal because she still knows how to look at things. I signed on as a counter. I used Delphine's maiden name and a work history that Odette built in an afternoon, and I showed up at 11:50 at night on the 29th of December at the back door of the store I opened in 1979, in a borrowed coat, with a clipboard, and I was checked in by a 20-year-old technician who had never seen me before, and who told me to start on aisle 3 and work toward the wall. Nobody looks at a counter. A counter is not a person in a pharmacy. A counter is a pair of hands attached to a clipboard, and I had been the man who hired them for 4 decades, and I knew exactly how invisible they are. I counted aisle 3. I counted it correctly, because if you are going to be a man doing a job, then you do the job, and because I have never in my life put a number on a sheet that was not true. At 1:40 in the morning, the technician went out to her car to smoke, and I walked to the back of the pharmacy, to the narrow room behind the fill station where the paper lives. I want to tell you what that was like, because I did not expect it, and it nearly stopped me. I built that room. I chose the shelving. The bench along the north wall is the one Delphine's father made for us, out of a church pew in 1981, and I have the burn mark on the corner where I set down a hot plate in 1986. And I stood in it at 1:40 in the morning, in a borrowed coat under somebody else's name, and for about 10 seconds, I could not make my hands work. Then I got the binder. Central fill deliveries arrive in sealed vials with a manifest, and that manifest gets signed by the receiving pharmacist and lives in a binder for 2 years because federal law says it does. It is one of the last things in the profession that is still paper, and it is paper for exactly this reason. I photographed 162 pages in 14 minutes, standing sideways so I could see the hallway in the reflection of the glass cabinet. The manifests told the whole story, and they told it in Wendell Marchetti's handwriting. Since the 12th of November, the Council Bluffs facility had shipped my maintenance prescription to Phillips Avenue 7 times. Every manifest listed a lot number, and every one of those 7 lot numbers was a lot that had been recalled and pulled from distribution in September, 4 full months earlier, and returned to the manufacturer. That is not a mistake. A recalled lot does not accidentally reappear in a sealed vial in December. A recalled lot number appearing on a manifest is a lot number that somebody typed, because the vials it was describing had never been in a manufacturer's building in their lives. And Wendell had signed all 7. Not initialed. Signed, full signature, in blue ink, on the receiving line, 7 times, which meant he had personally verified sealed vials of counterfeit product and put them on his own shelf under his own license for a patient whose name was printed on the same page. Mine. I sat down on Delphine's father's bench in the dark, and I was still sitting there at 2:10 when the back door alarm chimed and the lights came up in the fill station. Wendell Marchetti came in at 2 in the morning wearing a coat over pajamas, and he walked directly past the open doorway of that room, 4 feet from me, and he did not look in. He went to the safe. He opened it, and I watched him through the gap in the shelving take out a plastic bag of loose tablets that had no business being in a controlled safe, and put it into his coat pocket, and stand there with his hand still in the pocket, not moving, for a very long time. He was 29 years old when I signed his note. He is 34 now, and I sat 11 feet away from him in the dark and watched him stand in my old store at 2 in the morning, with counterfeit tablets in his pocket, breathing like a man who had been running. Then he closed the safe and went out the back, and I heard his car start. I finished aisle 3. I signed out at 5:50 in the morning under my dead wife's name, and I drove home with the heater on, and I was so tired going up my own stairs that I sat down on the chair on the landing for 11 minutes. Odette had the manifest to a federal prosecutor by 9 that morning. By that afternoon, there was a meeting in a conference room downtown, and there were 4 people at it, and one of them was from the Drug Enforcement Administration's diversion office, and had been waiting 11 months for a reason to open the Council Bluffs facility. The prosecutor was clear with me. She said that she had a magnificent case against a supply chain and a very ordinary case against a family. She said Wendell would say he received sealed vials in good faith. She said Camille would say she managed 400 accounts and could not personally know the contents of a vial. She said Tobias would say he was a worried grandson who signed what a lawyer put in front of him, and that a jury looks at that and sees a family that got sloppy. She said what she needed was one of them to describe it out loud, knowing exactly what it was. And she said that she was not permitted to ask me to obtain it. I said that she had not asked. Here is what we did, and it was Odette's idea, and it was better than mine. We did not build a fake document. We did something simpler. On the 2nd of January, 4 days before the hearing, I called my grandson, and I withdrew. I told him he was right. I told him I had been sitting up here alone thinking about Thanksgiving, and that I had gone up my own stairs on Christmas Eve and had to stop twice, and that a man knows. I told him I did not want to be dragged into a courtroom in front of people who had known me since 1979 and have a judge say those words about me out loud. I asked him whether there was a way to do it without the hearing. There was. There always is. It is called a voluntary consent to guardianship, and it takes 11 minutes and a notary. I said I wanted to sign it upstairs, in my own kitchen on Sunday the 4th, and I wanted the lawyer there so it would be done right. And then I said the sentence Odette wrote for me and made me practice out loud 4 times. I said, and I would like Camille to be there, because she was the only one at that table who was kind to me, and I want her to hear me say that I know she has been looking out for me. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "She will be there, Grandpa." They came at 2 in the afternoon on Sunday the 4th of January. Tobias came up my stairs first with a bakery box, which I have thought about a great deal since. Camille came up behind him in a gray coat, and the lawyer from Omaha came up last with a briefcase and a notary he had brought with him from his own office. Odette was in my bedroom with the door shut. There were 4 federal agents and a state board investigator in the storeroom at the bottom of my stairs, standing among boxes of paper towels, and there had been 2 technicians in my kitchen at 10 that morning. Wendell Marchetti was sitting downstairs in the back of a car on Phillips Avenue with his lawyer, and he had been talking since Friday night. I want to describe the next 18 minutes carefully, because they are the last 18 minutes of my life in which I had a grandson. They came in the way people come into a place they have already decided about. Camille took off her coat without being offered a hook and laid it over the back of Delphine's chair. The lawyer put his briefcase on my kitchen table and clicked it open, and Tobias set the bakery box on the counter and turned around and looked at me, and his face did something complicated. "Grandpa," he said, "you look tired." "I have not been sleeping," I said. That was completely true. We sat down. I put my glasses on and let my hand shake on the way to the pen, and I watched Camille's eyes go down to it, exactly the way they had gone down to it at Thanksgiving. Before I sign, I said, "I want to say something to my grandson." The lawyer glanced at his watch. Camille said, "Of course," and put her hand over mine on the table. I looked at Tobias. He was sitting in the chair his grandmother sat in for 31 years. "You called me a burden," I said, in front of 11 people. And I drove home 4 hours the next morning, and I have thought about it every day since, and I want you to know I understood why you said it. You have watched me drive that car and live in these 2 rooms your whole life, and you decided that is what 42 years of work buys a man, and I let you think it. I chose to let you think it. And whatever happens after today, that part is mine." His eyes filled. They filled completely, and I have thought about that a great deal since, and I have concluded that a man can weep and lie in the same minute without the slightest difficulty. "Grandpa, do not." "I am going to sign this," I said. But I need to understand what I am agreeing to. Not the legal part. He can handle the legal part. I turned to Camille. I need to understand what happens to me. Where am I going to be, Camille? After this. And she smiled at me. It was an incredibly good smile. You are going to be right here, she said. Nothing changes. That is the whole point. For how long? For as long as you are safe here. And when I am not? She glanced at Tobias. Tobias was looking at the table. Then we would find somewhere appropriate, she said. There is a residence in Papillion we have looked at. It is lovely. How expensive? 6,000 a month. Camille, I have 2,900 a month and no house, which is why the consent has to include the estate, she said patiently. There is no estate, I said. That is what I am telling you. There is a chair, a car, and a photograph of my wife. 6,000 a month for a man with 2,900 is 11 weeks. What happens in week 12? And for the first time since I had met her, Camille Beaumont-Ancel hesitated. It lasted less than a second. But I have stood behind a counter and watched 4,000 people want a number to be something other than what it was, and I know precisely what that half-second is. That is a long way off, she said. How long? Harlan? How long, Camille? Because I moved my prescription in November and nobody told me, and my cardiology appointment moved to February and nobody told me, and I have been going up my own stairs on my hands for 2 weeks, and I am asking you at my own table how long you think I have got. The kitchen went completely silent. The lawyer had stopped moving with his pen an inch above his legal pad. Camille sat back in Delphine's chair and looked at me for a moment, and I watched her run the calculation. And I watched her decide that I was a 70-year-old man with a pen in his hand who had already agreed, and that the truth was cheaper than another lap around it. 6 weeks, she said. Maybe 8. You have already done the hard part. Say the rest of it. There is no rest of it. Your heart is going to stop, Harlan, and it is going to stop on its own, and everyone is going to be very sad. She said it with total calm. Nobody is doing anything to you. We simply stopped doing something for you. There is not a law in this country against that, and there is not a coroner in South Dakota who is going to open a 70-year-old cardiac patient with a guardianship file. Tobias put both hands flat on my kitchen table. He did not look at me. He said, You told me it would be quiet. It is quiet. You told me in November that it would be quiet, and that it would be quick. And it is January, and he is still sitting here asking me questions. He was breathing badly, and his voice was climbing. I gave you the store. Do you understand that I am the one who gave you the store? You did not know where he fills. I told you the name of that pharmacy and a wine bar 11 weeks before you ever met him because you asked me what he was like, and I said he is a stubborn old man who has filled at the same counter since 1979 and would not change it if the roof came off. That was me. And I brought you to Thanksgiving so you could hear him say it out loud. And I sat there and I watched you ask him, and then I drove you home. And we talked about the timing in the car. He raised his head and looked straight at me, and his face was wet, and there was not one thing behind it that I recognized. And I would do it again tomorrow, he said, because I am $111,000 down and out of road, and you were never going to give me $1 of it while you were breathing. Nobody said anything. I reached across my own kitchen table, passed the pen, and I turned over the last page of the document the lawyer had brought, and underneath it was a single sheet that Odette had put there at 10 o'clock that morning. Read that, I said to Camille. What? Out loud. She looked down. Her eyes went across the first line and stopped, and went back, and went across it again. It was a certificate of ownership, the Delaware holding company that owns the building at 1140 Phillips Avenue, and holds the personal guarantee on Wendell Marchetti's operating note, and holds $26 million in a trust established by Delphine Bissonnette in the year of her death. Sole beneficial owner, Harlan Bissonnette. That is not possible, she said. I sold 11 stores in 2011, and I let this town print that I lost them, I said. I have been that young man's landlord for 6 years, and I co-signed his note myself, and he has never known. You ran a book review on 400 accounts, and you found a compliant cardiac patient with no dependents, and you went and got my grandson out of a wine bar to reach him. I put the pen down in front of her. I would have written you a check, Camille. If either of you had come up those stairs in November and told me the truth about the debt, I would have written it that afternoon and never told a living soul. Tobias made a sound. But you did not come to me, I said. You ran a count on me. You looked at an old man in a rented apartment with a rusted car, and you put a number on him. And you got it wrong, because you never once opened the bottle. The door at the bottom of my stairs came open, and then my kitchen came apart. The lawyer began talking before anybody had asked him a question. He had emails. He had a memo. He wanted it entered right now, immediately, that he had raised concerns in writing on the 9th of December, that he had been handed a completed physician's letter by his client, and had no basis whatsoever to question it, that he had never heard the name Wendell Marchetti in his life. He said Camille's name 9 times in a minute. He was still talking when an agent took his elbow, and he twisted around to keep talking over his own shoulder all the way to the landing. Camille came up out of Delphine's chair so fast that it went over backward onto the linoleum, and she was screaming at my grandson before it landed. She screamed that it was his debt. She screamed that he had come to her, that he had cried in a parking garage in Council Bluffs in October, that he had handed her the pharmacy on a napkin and had not needed to be asked twice. An agent got her right wrist, and she went sideways into my counter hard enough to take the dish rack down with her, and she went down onto one knee among Delphine's plates, with her hair completely over her face, and one shoe off, and she never once looked at me. She was still screaming at Tobias when they walked her out, and every word of it was addressed to him. My grandson went down onto the floor of my kitchen. He did not wait to be told to stand. His knees simply quit, and he went down beside the table, and then he crawled. He crossed the 4 feet between his grandmother's chair and mine on his hands and his knees, and he took hold of my trouser leg with both fists, and he pressed his forehead against my knee. He said that he was my only family. He said it 3 times. He said, "Do you remember the crate, Grandpa? Do you remember the quarter?" And it came apart in the middle of his mouth. He said that he was frightened, that men had come to his apartment in Omaha in September and stood in his hallway for 20 minutes without saying very much, that he had not slept a whole night since the spring. He said Grandma would not want this. He said, "Please look at me." He said, "Please. I am the only one you have got left. Please look at me." And there was a long thread of spit swinging from his lip onto my kitchen floor, and his whole back was going. I looked at him. That was the only thing I did. I did not speak. I did not move. I did not take my eyes off my grandson, and the room went completely silent around the 2 of us except for the sound he was making, and the refrigerator, and Camille out on the landing, still shouting that it was his debt. Then an agent put a hand under his arm, and Tobias grabbed at my trouser leg again, coming up, and I let him hold it for 1 more second. Then I reached down and took his wrist, and I opened his fingers one at a time, and I put his hand away from me. "You stopped being my grandson in a wine bar," I said, 11 weeks before you introduced her to me. They took him down the stairs he learned to walk on. Odette came out of my bedroom and sat down at the table, and neither of us said anything for a long while, and then she righted Delphine's chair and picked up 2 of the plates that had not broken, and she drove me to the emergency department at Sanford, and I was admitted that night and kept for 11 days. I want to be honest about that part, because I have made this sound more controlled than it was. My heart had been running unsupported for 6.5 weeks, and the damage was not theoretical. I spent 4 of those days in a unit with a monitor over my head, and there was one night, the 3rd night, when the number on that monitor did something that brought 4 people into the room at a run, and I have never told anybody what I thought about while they were working. I did not get all of it back. I take 3 medications now, instead of 1, and I do not go up a flight of stairs without a hand on the rail, and I sold the Chevrolet because a cardiologist asked me to. They very nearly finished it. That is the truth. They failed by a matter of days, and they failed only because I have a pharmacist's hands, and I poured 7 tablets into my palm on a Sunday morning, and knew Camille Beaumont-Ancel was indicted on 19 counts, including conspiracy, healthcare fraud, distribution of counterfeit medication, and attempted murder. She took it all the way to trial because she was completely certain she would be believed, and the jury was out for 6 hours. She is serving 31 years. She has appealed twice, and both appeals were denied. The 7 signed manifests and her own sentence, spoken at my kitchen table in her own voice, are the 2 exhibits the government led with on the first morning. Wendell Marchetti surrendered his license, cooperated fully, and testified for 9 hours over 2 days. He received 61 months. He wrote to me from Yankton in the 2nd year, and I have never opened it. I signed his note. I put my name on his life when no bank in this state would, and he took counterfeit tablets out of a controlled safe at 2 in the morning and put them in the pocket of a coat he was wearing over his pajamas. And then he went home and slept in a house I helped him buy. The lawyer from Omaha surrendered his license and received 22 months. My grandson pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and to a separate count for his role in the withholding, and he is serving 14 years. The prosecutor asked me before sentencing whether I wished to submit a statement asking for leniency for him on the basis of family relationship. I told her that I did not have a family relationship to submit. He wrote to me twice in the first year. I returned both envelopes unopened, and after the second one he stopped. The store on Phillips Avenue is still mine, and it is still open. I hired a pharmacist out of Vermilion, 41 years old, and I told her on the first day exactly who owns the building, because I have learned something about what secrets are for. The trust now funds a program through the South Dakota Pharmacy Association that pays for independent verification testing when a patient or a pharmacist believes a medication has been substituted. It is free. There is a number on a sticker, and we put the sticker on the bottle. We have run 940 tests in 19 months, and we have found 11 bad lots, and 2 of those 11 were not accidents. I go into the store on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I do not fill anything anymore, because my hands are not what they were, and I will not put a number on a sheet I cannot stand behind. I sit at the consultation window and I talk to people over 65 about their medications, and about once a month somebody sits down across from me and says that a son or a daughter has started handling their pills for them, and something about it does not feel right, and they cannot say what. I always tell them the same thing. Pour a week out into your hand, every Sunday. Even if you have no idea what you are looking for, your hand keeps a record that your eyes do not, and the day something is wrong you will know it before you can explain it, and that knowing is worth more than any opinion anybody is going to offer you about your own mind. And I will tell you the other thing I have learned, and then I will let you go. When a family member suddenly becomes very concerned about your health, notice what they do with the concern. A person who is actually frightened for you drives you to the doctor. A person who is building something moves the appointment. Watch the calendar, not the face. Watch who is canceling things on your behalf. Love adds appointments. Every single time in my life that I have seen this done to somebody, the first thing that went missing was not money. It was a doctor's visit that somebody else rescheduled to be helpful. They looked at an old man in 2 rented rooms and decided what he was worth, and they were off by $26 million. And they were off by that much because they only ever counted what they could see from the outside. Has somebody in your family ever quietly taken over something you were handling yourself? Your medications, your mail, your appointments? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and I answer more of them than you would expect. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are a great many more of us out here than anybody realizes.